Welcome. What we're going to be doing in this session is looking at the assessment task requirements for Unit Standard 7091, establish a culturally safe and inclusive learning environment for adults in New Zealand's cultural setting. Now, what's significant about this particular assessment task is that it is a compulsory one. If you want to complete your National Certificate in Adult Education and Training Level 4 or Level 5, the New Zealand Environment Strand. So this is a key assessment that you'll need to complete. So what you'll need to have in front of you is a copy of your assessment task that you should have in your Edbiz pack. So make sure you grab a copy of that, you have that in front of you, and along with a pen will be helpful as well. So if you don't already have that in front of you, please pause this video and grab it, and then you can continue. Okay, so you've got your stapled assessment task, which looks something like this in front of you. What we're going to go and do now is just review it to make sure you understand what it is that you need to do. So if I just go down here, you'll see here that this is a level 4 assessment, and it's 4 credits. Okay, so level 4 is not as I suppose tricky as university. It's not a university level assessment. Okay, so it's not going to require you to do a lot of research, but it is a bit more than what perhaps you might be expected to do at high school. Okay, so it's also 4 credits, which count towards the credits that you need for your National Certificate in Adult Education and Training. You'll see the outcomes here in the overview, that people assessed as competent in this unit standard are able to identify diverse cultural needs in a New Zealand learning environment and can establish culturally safe and inclusive learning environments for adults. Just a couple of notes here that you need to know, that when you're creating, maintaining this kind of environment, that the practical part of this assessment must comply with Health and Safety and Employment Act. So make sure that you're aware of that, and also any organisational policies and procedures. That the assessment against this unit standard must include knowledge of the New Zealand Māori and Pākehā cultures and at least one other culture. Okay, so just make a note of that. That's going to come up again soon. Okay, so must include knowledge of the New Zealand Māori and Pākehā cultures and at least one other culture, and delivery and assessment of this unit standard must occur in a New Zealand cultural setting. So if you're outside of New Zealand, then you're not going to be able to complete this assessment task. When we're talking about organisational requirements, we're talking about instructions to staff on policy procedures which are documented in your workplace. This could be site-specific requirements, quality management requirements. When we talk about culture in this assessment, we're talking about worldviews and behaviours of individual learners and groups of learners which affect the way they interact and learn. So culture may include beliefs, values, language, verbal, non-verbal communications, music protocol, beliefs, ethnicity, age, and gender. Okay. And when we're talking about culturally safe and inclusive learning environments, we're talking about one that ensures the cultural backgrounds and needs of individuals and groups are identified, recognises and respects those backgrounds and associated values, and also that the trainer takes proactive steps to meet those needs. Alright. Now if we just go to the assessment task summary here on page 2, you'll see here for task 1, this is 3 tasks. Task 1 is that you need to identify the cultural needs of yourself and also 2 of your learners who are from cultures that are different from your own and from each other. So if, for example, you are New Zealand, European or Pākehā, then you need to have a learner who's Māori, alright, and then one who's of a different culture. Now that may not be ethnic culture. So what I mean by that is that your second learner could be just someone who's in a different age bracket to you. alright, or someone who's a different religion to you, someone who is in a different socioeconomic bracket than you. Okay, so if you go back to that definition of culture, anyone whose language and beliefs define their worldview and behaviours, if that's different to yours, then you can use them. Okay, they have a different culture, so it doesn't just have to be ethnic culture. All right, other than if you're European or Pākehā, then one of your learners has to be Māori. The other one could be younger, older. If you're male, it could be female. If you're female, it could be male. So just think of culture in that way as well. Okay. If you are Māori, New Zealand Māori, then one of your learners will need to be Pākehā. Okay, so someone who is ideally New Zealand European from that background, and then another learner who's again of a different culture, again younger, older, different religion, etc. Okay, so the Māori European aspect is a key part of someone achieving the standard. So you, as part of your study towards this assessment, you would have done some recognition of Māori learner needs and European learner needs there as well. So you need to identify those cultural needs. The second part of this assessment is based on those needs. You need to come up with 3 behaviours that are demonstrated by yourself and all your learners that may cause barriers. So it could be language, it could be religion, things that may come up that may create some difficulties. You'll need to attach a copy of any relevant organisational policies, procedures that relate to providing a culturally safe and inclusive learning environment. So it could be QMS, which stands for Quality Management System Extracts, policies, procedures, anything that your organisation may have that gives a trainer guidance on culturally safe and inclusive learning. And the last bit, task 3, is you establishing a culturally safe and inclusive learning environment. So you need to identify 3 actions that you can take as an adult trainer to establish a more culturally safe and inclusive learning environment. You need to get some feedback from your learners. So in order for you to establish a culturally safe and inclusive learning environment, you're going to need to deliver some training to a group of learners that are of different cultures to you, and get some feedback on your facilitation and your delivery, and were you actually in fact able to deliver your training in a way that was culturally safe and inclusive. Alright, so you'll need to attach feedback from at least 3 learners from different cultures to you and from each other. So your 3 learners can't be all Māori if you're Pākehā. They can't be. You can't have a Māori learner and then a learner who may be Islamic, will be a Muslim, and then another learner who's Māori, because then you've got 2 Māoris. Alright, so you need to make sure that your 3 learners are of different cultures to each other. Now, if you're in a context where you can't achieve that, you're going to need to find or create an opportunity where you can. Okay, now remember, this can be done in work, it can be done outside of work. If you're part of a club, if you're a part of a church, if you're part of an organisation like maybe, I don't know, Toastmasters or something, where you can deliver some kind of training, then you might need to manufacture an environment where you get at least 3 other learners together who are of different cultures to you. Now, if you are being assessed against the standard as part of your Edbiz Trainer course, where, for example, you have to deliver 3 separate training sessions. If you're doing 19444 or 7115, then this assessment could be integrated into that. So if those training sessions, or one of those training sessions that you're using, includes learners who are of different culture to you, includes a Māori if you're not Māori, or includes a Pākehā, New Zealand European if you are Māori, plus 2 other cultures, alright, that are different from you and different from each other, then you could use this assessment as a part of one of those 3 training sessions. Then you just need to get your manager to sign the assessment at the end. So let's just have a quick look here what you need to do. Task 1, this is about identifying cultural needs. So for this task you need to demonstrate your ability to identify the cultural needs in relation to the specific learning environment. So where it is you're going to be doing your training. Here's two tables that you need to complete. Alright, in relation to the specific learning environment for your culture, and at least two other cultures different from your own and that are different from each other. Now this is really important, this note here. Assessment must include knowledge of the New Zealand Māori and Pākehā cultures and at least one other culture from among those in your learning environment. Now remember, again, going back to the definition of culture, doesn't have to be ethnic culture. It could be another person who's a different religion, all right, and a different age bracket. Has very different hobbies or lifestyle from your own. So the first part here is this is what you need to complete. You need to identify your culture. So are you Māori? Are you Pākehā? Or are you from another culture? Now I recommend for this one here you go with your ethnic culture. So if you're Māori, identify yourself as Māori. If you're Pākehā, identify yourself as Pākehā. If you're other, you might say you might be English or South African, or from Asia or India. All right, then I recommend for this bit here you go with ethnic culture. All right. Now, based on your identification of your culture, you have to explain at least 3 cultural needs that you have as an adult trainer, alright, in the New Zealand learning environment. So what we mean by that is you might say, hey, well look, I'm New Zealand European slash Pākehā, I'm a trainer. What 3 cultural needs that I have in terms of my values and beliefs and how I use language and protocols and gender roles and learning styles? So for example, you might say, hey look, well, from my culture, New Zealand, European, Pākehā, you might say that, hey, you could say time management is important. All right, if that's one of the things you think is important in your culture, then you might say that. Time management is important. Students arriving on time is really important. No swearing in the classroom could be a cultural need that you have. Personal presentation and hygiene could be a cultural need. Use of cell phones. How the classroom is managed. So is it an environment where people can't talk over each other and is debate, or is it in your culture that's not an appropriate environment for learning? So you need to come up with at least 3 cultural needs that you have as a trainer. So the best way to do that, I think, is to think about what are your expectations as a trainer in terms of learning, how learning should be done based on your cultural identity. Okay. So you've got room for 4, you need to come up with at least 3. Now that's you. The next page here now is for you to work out the cultures of at least 2 of your learners. So identify 2 cultures that are different from your own of learners who you facilitate. Okay. For the first culture you identified above, so you might say, hey, look, well, now I have a learner. I'm New Zealand, European, Pākehā. I've got a learner who's Māori. Now remember, if you are, then you have to have a learner who's Māori to meet the requirements of this assessment. So what you need to do in this example, if you did tick Māori, you need to say, well look, well for a learner who's Māori, what's 3 of their cultural needs? What's 3 needs that a Māori learner has? So for example, you might put down there, hey look, well teaching that involves whānau or family members is important. So how can you involve the family members? That's an important part of the training. Use of stories and illustrations in a culture like Māori, where it's an oral, where there's been an oral culture, then those sort of things often work really well. So remember, all this will come from your research that you've done. If you're not sure, then what I recommend you do is ask one of your Māori learners and say, hey, look, from someone who's Māori, I'm really keen to find out, when you come along and sit in on my training session, what's 2 or 3 things that you really want to happen in that training session that reflects who you are as someone who's Māori? What does a Māori learner expect in terms of their cultural needs, in terms of how they learn? So you've got to come up with at least 3. And you'll see here you've got the same thing again for the second culture. Alright, now remember, if you're Pākehā and you've picked a Māori learner for the first one, your next learner can't be Pākehā. Alright, you can't tick Pākehā, you can't tick Māori, but you can tick other. Okay, other could be, well, this person's from Korea. Alright, so you've gone with a Korean ethnic culture. Or you might say, well, this person here is Māori, but they're Muslim. So being Muslim is different from your first learner, who might be Māori but not be Muslim, and different from you if you're not Muslim. Okay, so your second learner has to be different culture from you and from your first learner. Okay, so again, for someone who is from that culture, what is 3 cultural needs that they'll have in terms of their learning? Okay, so it could be they like to be addressed more formally. Use of their surname is perhaps more appropriate. They like to learn more by listening than by doing. Now, whatever it is, now you're going to need to do some bit of research on that culture if you haven't already, and find out. And again, like I said before, if you weren't sure, then you might talk to that learner and again say, hey, look, for your learning, how do you like to learn as someone who is from Korea, or someone who is Muslim, or for someone who's a generation Y, or from someone who's a baby boomer? What are those cultural needs that you have from someone from that culture in a learning environment? So you'll jot down at least 3 there. Now, once you've done that little bit of research and you've come up with those cultural needs, the second bit is, well, hey, what's 3 things that could come up that could create barriers? So, for example, you might say that, hey, look, well, one of those things, one of my learners is from a culture that uses a different language, so English is not their first language. So that could be a behavioural barrier. So you might put behaviour 1 is use of language. One of my learners does not speak English very well. English is not their first language. So then you need to come up with, well, what's a recommendation that you need to do to comply with your organisation's policies and procedures around how we handle that kind of behaviour in our learning environments. Another example could be learning styles, and perhaps you like to use lots of interaction in games and activities, but you might have someone who's from a more conservative culture. They could be from an older age bracket, or from a conservative religion, where perhaps interaction or eye contact or group discussion is not is not preferable. So if that came up, if that's one of those barriers, then what does your company policy procedures say around how you should be handling that? So I think for this one here, you've got to describe 3. Okay, 3 behaviours that can come up that could cause barriers. Now remember, for this task number 2, you're thinking, well, if those barriers come up, what does my company policy procedures say around how they should be handled? If you don't have a policy procedure, then I recommend you have a discussion with your supervisor and manager And for recommendations, that's where you're going to put down what you agree with your manager or supervisor around how those things should be handled. Okay. If you do have a policy procedure, then attach a copy of that to the assessment task. Now we're up to task 3. Okay. So what you're going to need to do is, you've already done task 1, so you've identified their cultural needs. You've done task 2, where you've identified the kind of issues that could come up and how you need to manage them according to your organisation's policies, procedures. The third bit is about you just delivering the training and making sure that you're recognising those cultural needs, and that in this training session, which could be one of those 30-minute training sessions that you're doing for one of your other assessments, that you're really aware of those cultural needs and you're accommodating those cultural needs and delivering your training in a way that's reflecting those needs. Okay, so what you need to do for task 3 is, once you've done that training, you need to get some feedback from your learners, alright, in terms of how that training session went for them. Alright. So the first thing is that you need to identify, well, what's 3 actions, 3 things that you did in that training session to try and accommodate those cultural needs. So you might have said, hey, look, well, I created an environment where there was lots of discussion, where I used lots of stories that worked really well with you might say my Māori learners, and I spoke really slowly and clearly to accommodate the needs of my learners whose English was not their first language, and I provided copies of handouts at the end that they could take home and use. I made sure I didn't use activities that involved contact for between male and female for the learner or learners who were Muslim. So you just need to jot down what those actions were, at least 3 actions that you took, and then the second part of that is getting feedback from your learners. So what I recommend you do at the end of the training session, you get 3 learners together. Now they are your 2 learners who you identified at the start. Okay, so again, either Māori or Pākehā learner plus one other. Okay, so you need 3 learners for this bit, for the feedback. Okay, who are different cultures from you and from each other. Okay, so again, you need to think about, hey, if you don't deliver training where you've got yourself and 3 other learners who have different cultures from each other. Now remember, it doesn't have to be ethnic culture other than Māori and Pākehā, which is important. Then after that, it could be religion, could be age, could be gender. Alright, so it shouldn't be too hard to try and identify a group of learners who's going to meet this requirement. So you need to get some feedback. Say, hey guys, look, this is what I did. I did this action. I tried to go real slowly and speak really clearly. I tried to use activities that were culturally appropriate in terms of religion. I tried to do this and get some feedback from them to find out, hey, look, did that work? Did they feel that training session was culturally safe and inclusive for someone from their culture? So again, remember, it could be Māori and Pākehā culture, it could be someone from a different religion, someone who's from a different gender than you, different age brackets from you and from the rest of them. Okay, so if I imagine having a group of learners in front of me, for myself being New Zealand, European, Pākehā, one of my learners in this group could be Māori. I've got another one here who's South African, another one here who's New Zealander but is much older than me, and another learner here who's New Zealander who might be Buddhist or might be Muslim, all right, or Catholic. So I've got myself and 3 learners who are different cultured to myself, but also different from each other. Alright, so they've got things that are different. They have different needs. So I've got my learners together, and I might be talking to them after the training session, or I might get them to fill in the form afterwards. I might create a bit of an evaluation form. Alright. Now, however you get their feedback from them, it has to be done according to your organisation's policies and procedures. And if you don't have policies, procedures, and how you get feedback from learners, then again you might need to check with your manager or supervisor and just clarify the best way to get feedback from your learners. So you just need to make some notes there in terms of the feedback that you got, and you may attach a copy of the forms if you used forms. You don't have to, but if you did. Alright, so once you've done that, and hopefully you've got some really good feedback from your learners to say that yes, our trainer delivered a really awesome session that was culturally safe and inclusive, then you just need to show that evidence to your manager, and then you and your manager complete this here on page 10. Okay. Now the last thing we have here is the marking bit, which is the assessment guide. So you don't need to fill any of these pages, rest of these pages in. This is what Edbiz does. But you will see the marking guide, or the assessment guide. So the evidence, what you need to do, and the judgment, how good it needs to be. So this is essentially the marking sheet that we're going to use to work out, hey, did you meet the requirements of this assessment task or not? So it's really useful for you to get familiar with these. Alright, so that's your assessment. So it's not a complicated assessment. It may take a bit of planning though to make sure you've got the right group of learners. And again, like I said, you might need to manufacture a situation where perhaps you borrow some learners from somebody else, or perhaps you do it outside of your organisation, in a church group, or a hobby group, or a professional group that you're a part of, where you can deliver some training. That will probably be the tricky thing with this assessment. Now, if you have any questions around this assessment task, and what it is that you need to do, and how you might meet that, then just please give us a call or an email at Edbiz, and we'll be happy to clarify that for you. And just to reiterate again, if you're completing this assessment as part of your Train the Trainer, then you could use one of those 3 sessions to complete your 7091 assessment. So I hope that's clear for you, and I hope you have a really good understanding now of what you need to do. Make sure you're aware of the due date for this assessment task, because if it's not in before the due date, you may not be marked on it. So make sure you have that clarified if you don't already know. So please contact Edbiz if you don't know the due date for this assessment. Best wishes and good luck.